So, in a very, very important day for CBA negotiations, it does seem like Nakamura and the WNBA staff went to Nashville to check in on the AU players alongside fellow committee members Alicia Clark and Bree Turner, discussing ongoing CBA negotiations. We'll be interested to see what comes out of what a source describes an important post-point meeting with a large contingent of WNBA players.
This is the most important meeting of the WNBA season, and the season hasn't even started yet. Nakamura, the WNBA executive director, just flew to Nashville with committee members Alicia Clark and Bree Turner to meet with Athletes Unlimited players. Not the stars playing an unrivaled, not the veterans sitting at home. The AU players, the ones making between $20,000 and $40,000 for an entire off-season league. Why does this meeting matter so much? Because if these players vote to strike, there won't be a WNBA season in 20. Let me show you why.
However, if you guys don't know, obviously Nakamura is meeting with the AU players, and this is a group of players that I do think is going to have a huge, huge say, because if you guys don't know the Athletes Unlimited roster, the AU roster right now is like, you've got a lot of these players where if you're looking at them, these are players that are not going to be making the big bucks. Some of them are making good money, don't get it twisted, but a lot of them aren't going to be making the big bucks.
Look at that roster. Rebecca Gardner, Anissa Morrow, Caitlin Shen, Tina Charles, Melissa Smith, Kirsten Bell, Mackenzie Holmes, Mercedes Russell, Zaya Cook. Outside of maybe 2 players on that entire list, these are athletes on rookie deals, or playing for barely above minimum salary. These aren't the Caitlin Clarks or Angel Reese's of the league. These are players who were fighting for roster spots last season, and that's exactly why this meeting in Nashville could determine everything.
Like, I'm looking through this right here. I think just because of her defense, Kia Stokes will command some money in a bit like a Brianna Turner way. I think Izzy Harrison will command some money because I thought she was good, really good for New York last year. Odyssey Sims is definitely going to command some money after what she did with the Fever. But a lot of these players, though, playing in, this is a big thing.
Here's the financial reality nobody's talking about. Athletes Unlimited pays between $20,000 and $40,000 for the entire offseason. You cannot survive on that. Not in any major city in America. Not even in most small towns. That's poverty-level income for professional athletes. Meanwhile, the new CBA being negotiated would guarantee these same players a minimum of $250,000 per year in the WNBA. That's not generational wealth, but it's real money. It's the difference between working a summer job coaching AAU for free and actually having a professional basketball career.
While you are playing, you're not going to survive. You're not going to survive. Like, it is literally between 20 and 40K per player. It's not that long, but players make between 20 and 40K. Like, that is not ideal. That is not ideal at all when it comes down to it. Because between 20 and 40K is not going to be... Maybe you could survive, but you're not going to survive well.
So put yourself in their position. You're Grace Berger. Last season you were cut by Minnesota, scrambled to find work, ended up playing in 3 different 3v3 outdoor competitions, just to make ends meet. Then Dallas picked you up late in the season. You played well enough that there's maybe a 75% chance they keep you on a small contract this year. Now someone's asking you to strike, to walk away from $250,000 guaranteed, to risk that roster spot, to go back to outdoor 3v3 leagues and hoping someone call. Would you do it?
For nearly $0. Like, it is one of those things where what these players say is big. Because if these players are all for the strike, which I don't know why they would be. Because again, for example, Ariel Atkins is probably the only player that, based on her salaries, is like, oh, good money wise, and Tina Charles. But like, Tina Charles is probably going to walk into 3/4.
The players we know are pro-strike, are the unrivaled roster. They've made that clear in how they communicate publicly. They're the ones with the leverage, the guaranteed money, the outside opportunities. Brianna Stewart, Nafisa Collier, Angel Reese, they can afford to sit out a season. Their brands are big enough. Their financial situations are secure enough. But the Athletes Unlimited players, they're in a completely different situation. And here's what makes this meeting in Nashville so critical. If you combine the unrivaled roster with the AU roster, you're talking about more than 50% of the WNBA. If both groups vote to strike, the season doesn't happen.
I can guarantee you that the unrivaled players are majority pro-strike, because we've heard it in the way they're communicating. I think they're absolutely pro-strike. That being said, I think everybody else, my assumption is that everyone else is anti-strike. However, if it turns out that the AU players are pro-strike as well, there's going to be a strike. Not only is there going to be a strike, we all, like, if we have to be real here, if there's a strike, there's no WNBA. There's no WNBA. Like, Unrivaled is going to fail miserably soon, but
The owners aren't bluffing this time. They've already burned through an estimated $100 million in losses this past season. The investors who've been funding this expansion aren't going to commit more money after losing an entire season to a strike. This isn't like other sports labor disputes where both sides know they'll eventually come back to the table. If the 2026 season gets canceled, there's no 2027 season to come back to. The league folds. Unrivaled becomes the only option. And we all know that league is barely surviving as is. Without WNBA competition, Unrivaled might limp along for another year or two, but it won't thrive.
it's as simple as, it's not a case of there being money. Like, the owners who are burning $100 million for a season that doesn't happen are not randomly, and the investors are not randomly going to say, okay, yeah, we'll commit to putting in more money because we've burned all this money already. It's not going to work like that. The players are either going to if the players want there to be a season, 2027 season, if there's no 2026 season, they're going to either have to accept a much worse CBA than they're being offered currently, or there's not going to be a league. And I
Think about what's at stake for the rookies and second-year players. Paige Bakers is about to enter the league. The entire 2025 draft class just got selected. They've been preparing their entire lives for this moment. And now they're facing the possibility that there's no league to play in. Caitlin Clark's Nike deal, Angel Reese's endorsements, Serena and Esquire, Ed Wilson, all of these partnerships are built on the assumption that there's a WNBA to showcase their talent. What happens to those deals if the league disappears?
And you know what? If the players, like, from our perspective, they're shooting themselves in the foot. But at the end of the day, like, they could be onto something. They could be right. And even if they are walking towards a big cliff, you can't stop someone from walking off that cliff if they're adamant on jumping, unfortunately.
Here's what makes this situation so precarious. The deadline is Valentine's Day. If there's no strike announcement by February 14th, there will be a season. If there is a strike before that date, you might as well cancel the league entirely. There's no coming back from it. The players have to understand that this isn't a negotiating tactic. This is a decision about whether the WNBA continues to exist. And that brings us back to Nashville. To that athlete's unlimited roster. To those players making $20,000 to $40,000 in the offseason. The WNBPA knows this is the crucial voting block. The unrivaled players are already decided. The veterans sitting at home have mostly made up their minds. But the AU players, they're the swing vote. They're the ones who have the most to lose financially in the short term, but also the most to gain if the new CBA goes through. Think about someone like Kia Nurse. She's probably got 2, maybe 3 more years in the WNBA at most. If the league folds, that's it. Her career is over. No more professional basketball. She goes from making a few $100,000 a year to working a regular job. Same with Odyssey Sims, who just had a solid stint with the Fever. She's not getting younger. This could be her last real contract opportunity. Or look at Izzy Harrison, who was really impressive for New York last season. She's positioned herself to command decent money. Maybe not max contract money, but solid rotation player money. If she strikes and the league folds, she loses all of that leverage. She goes from ascending young player to unemployed. The players who can afford to strike are the ones who don't need the WNBA. The players who can't afford to strike are the ones who need it most. And that's the impossible position the WNBPA has put them in. Because here's the other side of this equation. If the AU players vote against striking, if they break ranks with the unrivaled group, the union fractured, you'll have the stars on one side saying the lower-paid players sold them out, and you'll have the lower-paid players on the other side saying the stars were willing to sacrifice their careers for principles they could afford to have. That division doesn't heal easily. But if the AU players vote to strike in solidarity, they're betting their entire careers on the owners blinking first. They're gambling that the league won't actually fold, that somehow the money will appear, that the investors will keep funding losses indefinitely. And that's just not realistic. The business fundamentals don't support it. The WNBA lost money last season. Despite record ratings, despite Caitlin Clark's impact, despite unprecedented media attention, the path to profitability is long and uncertain. Investors are patient, but they're not infinite. If you give them an excuse to walk away, they'll take it. So what happens in Nashville matters more than any other meeting this offseason. More than whatever the unrivaled players decide. More than what the veterans want. Because the AU players are the ones who actually have to make the impossible choice. Financial security now, or solidarity with players who won't suffer the same consequences. Nakamura knows this. That's why she flew to Nashville personally. That's why she brought committee members. That's why this is being described as an important post-point meeting. With a large contingent of players, she's not there to convince them to strike. She's there to take the temperature, to understand whether the union can actually hold together if she pushes for a strike authorization vote. And here's my read on it. If the AU players were unanimously pro-strike, we'd already know. The fact that Nakamura is still meeting with them, still discussing, still gauging sentiment, tells me there's real division. There are players in that room who are thinking about their bank accounts, their families, their futures, who are doing the math on $20,000 versus $250,000, and coming to the obvious conclusion. The pressure on these players is immense. They're being asked to be heroes, to stand up for the principle of fair compensation, to fight for future generations of WNBA players, and all of that is admirable. But they're also being asked to risk everything they've worked for, to potentially end their careers before they really began. To walk away from life-changing money on the hope that the owners will cave. Would you make that sacrifice? Would you tell your family that you're turning down $250,000 because the union needs solidarity? Would you risk never playing professional basketball again for a principle? Because that's not a hypothetical question for the players in Nashville. That's the actual decision in front of them. So we wait. Valentine's Day is the deadline. If we get to February 14th without a strike announcement, there will be a cease. The CBA negotiations will continue. Compromises will be made. And the WNBA will survive. If there's a strike before that date, start writing obituaries for the league, because the owners aren't bluffing, the investors aren't unlimited, and unrivaled isn't a viable replacement. The future of the WNBA is being decided right now in Nashville by players most fans have never heard of, by the athletes making poverty wages in Athletes Unlimited, by the ones with the most to lose and the least leverage. And whatever they decide in that meeting will determine whether we have professional women's basketball in America next year. No pressure.